Hello everybody, I'm Dom Raffaelli, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the effects of chicken on the current market. So we'll dive more into the history of chicken, the current and past pricing of chicken for different areas of time, and the effects chicken has on consumers. Okay, let's get into it. So a little bit about the history of chicken, just in general. So the advancements of chicken consumption of the human race throughout time. Originally, people in the 5th century BC used every single part of the chicken. Chickens at the time were much smaller than they are today, so they did not have the luxury of being able to pick out and choose which part of the chicken they particularly wanted, so they had to consume every part of the chicken and use it to its full extent, get every last bit of the nutrients and benefits out of it. In the 1940s, the USDA conducted the Chicken of Tomorrow contest. In this contest, they gathered a group of engineers to design a bird large enough to feed the entire family. Originally, chickens were much smaller and they did not possess the amount of mass needed to feed an entire family all at once. So engineers got together and were able to genetically modify certain chickens to be essentially 40% larger and were able to accommodate a full family to feed. Further down the line in the 1950s, processed chickens came into play. So this is when companies decided to make chicken nuggets and chicken tenders because people really liked the taste of specific chickens and made it a fast and efficient way to eat chicken. Later down the line, in 1964, Anchor Bar in Buffalo, New York, created a revolutionary new system to eat chicken. They created essentially buffalo wings, and this was a fast and easy way to handle chicken and eat it in an efficient manner for a very low price. Now we'll talk a little bit about the country's poultry consumption that's predicted for the next year in 2024. The U.S., according to this graph, the U.S. is the leading consumer of chicken products throughout the entire world. On average, people consume 49.3 kilograms per person per year. That is a lot of chicken. This is likely due to the American diet. People don't like to stray too far from their diets, so very heavily Americans rely on chicken, and they like to keep it that way. They like to keep the regular eating habits, and chicken just so happens to be one of the main dinners throughout that. In the past, chicken prices were quite modest. Say, for instance, 2018, the price of chicken went from the farm to the grocery store, where that original price was about $1.28 per pound for the entire bird, according to the USDA. Grocery stores would then take that and upcharge due to the processing fee. So the butcher fee and everything else that goes into packaging and processing the meat would be upcharged so that essentially the parts of the chicken can be sold separately. So according to this list, boneless chicken thighs will sell for approximately $2.48 per pound, chicken breasts $2.37, $1.65, bone and thighs were $1.36, drumsticks are $1.28, and a whole chicken is $1.28. So essentially, the bird can be processed into individual parts and sold at higher rates, and this would increase the overall price of the bird. So previously, menu prices of chickens in restaurants reflected the actual price as shown in a fair manner. Menus contained a large chicken selection with varying types of dishes that had a lot of different parts of the chicken to choose from. So the menu selection was pretty broad, and the prices reflected exactly what you would be offered. Accordingly, the price of the dish reflected the amount of chicken that you were getting and was a fair and decent price. Later down the line, up until 2020, COVID struck, and we see the price of chicken increase tremendously. So according to this graph, price inflation of chicken, we can see that anything past 2020 has a tremendous spike, approximately 3 times the amount of chicken consumption or chicken price inflation in the US. Different cuts of chicken were needed to meet the demands. So things like wings and chicken thighs become more affordable because chicken breasts are more expensive and essentially more in demand. So essentially, grocery stores would scale the pricing of chicken to meet the demands of the economy. So things like drumsticks and other parts of the chicken would become the same price, while other more expensive, more in demand chicken parts would increase. I did some investigating and research on my own by going to ShopRite and perusing the freezer section, where I was able to find different parts of chicken and was able to photograph the price of the chicken related to what it is. So By looking at the images on the screen, you're able to see that chicken thighs were about $3.49 per pound, drumsticks were $1.53, chicken breasts were $4.49, and paws were $2.49, along with the whole chicken as $1.99. So if you were to take the average price of those things, the average price per pound is approximately $3 a pound. In relation to the graph on the previous slide, that is approximately double the average price of around $3.50 a pound. So post-COVID pricing, which is current day, is tremendously more expensive than prior to. Further research I conducted included me going to certain restaurants and ordering a chicken dish and comparing the pre-COVID price to the current price. So going to the Nutley Diner, for instance, I got a chicken tenders appetizer with fries. Originally, in 2018 or so, it was approximately $14 for both of those things. Now, it's $20, and the quantity selection is slightly lower than what it used to be. An additional restaurant like Buffalo Wild Wings proved to have a similar outcome. The boneless wings originally, pre-COVID, were about $10.49, while the boneless wings afterwards, in current day, are about $10.79. So that's essentially a 30-cent markup, which isn't tremendous, but still, it is an increase. Later down the line, we visited Chick-fil-A and ordered a regular chicken sandwich. Nothing on it, plain chicken sandwich. Pre-COVID, the menu shows that it's about $3.05, while in current day, it is $4.99. That is a tremendous spike of almost $2, $1.94 to be exact. So, just proves again that chicken prices are increasing tremendously and is being reflected in menu prices at chain restaurants and pretty much any restaurant down the line. Now we'll talk a little bit about the struggles, particularly of these restaurants. So going down the line, we could see that the supplier's food is overpriced. So essentially this relates back to supply chain issues, going from the trucking and transportation restrictions to things to working restrictions, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in the next slide. But it goes from the supplier down to the restaurants, where the restaurants are forced to raise menu prices because of those original supplier issues. And by the restaurants raising the menu prices, people are unable to afford the pricing. Therefore, they'll eventually limit their visits to those restaurants, and that brings us to the next topic. By the supplier's food being overpriced, this leads the restaurants to have to raise their menu prices. Leaves them no other option. In order to stay afloat, restaurants have to charge menu prices that are higher than the price that they bought the food for. So this comes down to raising menu prices, and eventually people aren't going to be able to afford this type of menu pricing, and eventually they're going to reduce their limits. So say you would visit a restaurant a lot, eventually with raised menu prices, you're going to have to reduce your visits to that restaurant. And then this essentially reduces the overall income of that restaurant in particular, and leads to a higher potential for that restaurant closing in the future, just simply because they don't have the consumer basis that's going to keep coming back. Now we'll talk about the supply chain. So this topic is very extensive and we'll only cover it very briefly, but it is important because it does relate to the effects of chicken in the consumer market and in restaurants down the line. So the transporting and trucking aspect of things is very extensive. Essentially, the transportation side of things with trucking is due to labor shortages. So right now in the US, we are down about 80,000 commercial drivers, and it does not look like that's going to be re-upping anytime soon. So the majority of the drivers right now are 55 and over, and eventually they're going to retire, which could make this situation potentially worse. New drivers are not flooding into the market due to poor working conditions, as seen by the previous drivers, low pay, a lack of benefits. Just in general, it is not the industry that some people really want for their careers, so there aren't going to be new drivers that are coming into it. This leads us to our next topic of travel restrictions. So during COVID, as you may know, there were many federal and state restrictions that were imposed, as in travel bans and other types of bans, that made it much harder for companies to transport goods back and forth, whether it be from the farms to the grocery stores, or from the grocery stores or mass surplus stores to restaurants, it made it more difficult to transport food, thus increasing the price overall. Also, slightly due to transportation, but the cost of farming goods increased. So, the USDA imposed new standards for organic poultry and livestock, which changed the outdoor space requirements, living conditions, densities of chicken populations, along with healthcare and physical alterations, and also handling of livestock, which made it much more expensive for farmers to maintain their chicken selection, and essentially more expensive to run. So all of these things combined together will lead to secondary sources being outpriced. So this will cause restaurants to have to accommodate for that and increase their menu prices or grocery store prices to match the actual price that they bought the chicken for. This all in turn relates to the average shopper. So the effects on the average shopper are pretty tremendous, whether it be from household cooking recipes having to be altered, to people having to rely less on proteins and more on filler material. So people might have to reduce how much chicken they put into things and meats, and have to increase the amount of rice, pastas, and other filler materials that they're going to be eating. So homeowners need to budget and prioritize different things relating to their food selections, and will ultimately change their diet even though they might not want to. Essentially, there are different cuts of chicken with different values. Each part of the chicken maintains a certain value that has a higher demand. There's a variety of different cuts of chicken with differing values. There's certain demands to certain parts of chicken that are higher than others, which in turn will increase the price of that chicken part. So originally, chicken breasts have the highest value of meat, hence they're more expensive. Market prices of chickens increase. When the market price of certain chicken parts increase, it causes people, consumers, to tend to buy other parts of the chicken that are less valuable and essentially change their diet accordingly. So other things that can be used are the chicken leg, the wings of chicken, anything bone-in. They may have to relate to dark or light meat, etc. But eventually, you will be using a different part of the chicken that is more affordable, and it will essentially change your selection. So menus and dinner selections will cater to less expensive things just because of the household situation that you may be in. So this leads Americans to essentially choose the biggest bang for their buck, and that will relate to dinner selections and different parts of the chicken that will be used to accommodate themselves.